It's nice to see you here all for the sixth time. Tomorrow we are going to talk about silence in heaven. On Friday night we'll conclude with your place in history. But tonight we are going to talk about which heavens? The noisy heavens. Well, some people ask me a question, Vadim, where do you come from originally? I come from the Ural Mountains, which is a long mountain range, 2,000 kilometers long, and on the average 100 to 200 kilometers wide. And it's a natural border between Europe and Asia. I was born in the city of Magnitogorsk on the eastern slopes of the Ural Mountains. And if some of you go to the encyclopedia, like Wikipedia for instance, you will find out that the city of Magnitogorsk has a lot of cold days. In my city, out of 12 months a year, we have 9 months of negative temperatures and 3 months of positive temperatures. So that's the place where I grew up. And also it is one of the most polluted cities in the world. Currently it's not as polluted as it was when I was a child. When I was a child, our steel mills plant released in the atmosphere 800,000 tons of toxic chemicals every year. Now it's less, it's just 305,000 tons of toxic chemicals every year, but it's still one of the most polluted and one of the most polluting cities on the globe. I'll tell you a little bit more of what happened to me just 50 kilometers west of that place. But that will be after we look at the book of Revelation. We are looking at noisy heavens, and this week we are focusing our attention on one line of thought, the 7 seals. You remember that the book of Revelation is placed last amongst the biblical books, written by John the Apostle on the island of Patmos. In which sea? In the Mediterranean. At the end of the 1st century. A Jewish author writing in Greek. The structure of the book is Hebrew chiasm, which means that the main message is where? Is in the middle of the book. And almost all commentators agree that Revelation 14:7 is the key passage of the entire book. The first angel's message, which says, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and what? And the springs of water." And the last line of this text is the line which we may trace back to which commandment? To the 4th commandment, which talks about which day? The Sabbath day. It honors and glorifies the Creator. It is very important for us to know these things, my dear friends, and this is the reason. We know that historically, in the past 2,000 years, Christianity argued about many things. At the beginning of the 4th century, with the coming of a head elder of the church in Alexandria, his name was Arius, there comes the so-called Arian heresy, which denied the divinity of Jesus Christ. We know that the very first universal council of the church elders and bishops happened in Nicaea in 325 AD, where they discussed the truth about who God is. And the person of Christ, his nature, his divinity, his humanity, many different features were debated over hundreds of years. And we know that not only these things, but many others, whether we should worship the invisible God. You probably heard about the iconic crisis of the 8th and the 9th centuries, when Christianity in the East was arguing whether churches should have visible images or not. And there were many battles fought about this. The biblical truth about justification by faith. Thank you, Brenton, for talking today about Ephesians 2:8. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. It is the rediscovery of this truth which brings about the Protestant Reformation for Western Christianity. And that's how Protestantism was born a little over 500 years ago. We know that Christianity in the past 20 centuries debated about many things. However, there's one truth which will become the bone of contention, a piece of argument and discussion in the entire world right at the end of time. And the book of Revelation, looking at different aspects of future history, highlights right in the middle that at the end of time, Satan will challenge the Creator. And you may look at some important parallels in history. Take the 19th century. We know that in the 19th century, many great things appeared on the map of the world, including the Great Advent movement. And the Great Advent movement rediscovers on a church level the Sabbath truth. We know that there were some Sabbath-keeping Christians here and there around the world, but they were very small, marginal, and almost unnoticed. It was the Advent movement which brings the Sabbath truth and starts proclaiming it globally. It is around the same time that Charles Darwin, a great English biologist, having traveled the world, comes to us with the theory of evolution, which then brings a lot of scientists to deny the existence of the Creator. And we know that besides these things, if you guys increase my microphone just a little bit, maybe some fall back on the stage, yes, thank you. We know that in the world today we have a battle about God, if He exists or not, if there is a Creator or not. Satan at the end of time will challenge God's holy Sabbath day. In fact, the whole world will be divided about this issue. And it is this truth that sits right in the middle of the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation, as you all know, is the summary of the entire Bible. It also contains more than how many? 300 direct and indirect quotations from the Old Testament, which means that almost anything in this book can be understood if you study the Old Testament. Almost every passage, every symbol, you find a parallel in the Old Testament. Some in the New Testament, but mostly in the Old. There are symbols from the Old Testament, allegories, ideas, concepts, proverbs, words. This includes numerous references to the books of Ezekiel and Daniel. And this week we are covering just a small portion of the book of Revelation. We're looking at the 7 seals. At our first program last Friday, we spoke about the titles of Jesus in the book of Revelation. On Saturday, we spoke about Jesus as the lion and the lamb. Then we looked at the 144,000, the great multitude of people, which symbolizes the completeness of God's work of redemption in this world, and people who will see the triumph of God's truth and the coming of Christ, and they'll gladly receive Him coming back to this world. After that, we looked at the first 4 seals, the great 4 horsemen, the white horse, the red one, the black one, and the pale one, talking about the first 4 major periods in Christian history, and giving us more details to the churches of Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, and Thyatira in Revelation chapter 2. The 7 seals will not cover in more detail the remaining 3 churches from chapter 3, like Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. They're showing us what happens to Christians when they run away from the truth, the pure as crystal truth of the gospel. Yesterday we talked about the blessedness of martyrdom. The 5th chapter says that there will be martyrdom in the world for the name of, and for the sake of Christ until the end of time. There will be the full number of martyrs. And martyrs glorify their Lord Jesus. They make Christianity very strong and powerful. And martyrs are God's heroes. And I, as a simple sinner, born again in the grace of God, I want to imitate the faith of those great martyrs. It will be the faith of these great heroes which will help Christianity and God's children to survive the last world crisis. Revelation 6 verses 12 to 14. I watched as He opened the 6th seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned what? Blood red. And the stars in the sky fell to earth as figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of Him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can do what? And who can withstand it? So I've switched to, maybe you want to go home, so I just could pray for you. Okay, let's go back. I wanted to go back to Revelation 6. So I'll look at some important features of this text. So now the sixth seal is being opened. You remember in the fifth seal, the souls of the martyrs, or the blood of the martyrs, is calling out from beneath the altar, "How long will you, Lord, not avenge our blood?" So this is the time when God responds and God's judgment arrives. It says there was a great what? Earthquake. Now, try to remember, where else in the Bible do you find earthquakes? If you go with Moses and the people of Israel through the Sinai desert, and as they are situated, as they are camped at the foot of the mountain, what happened to that mountain when Moses climbed Sinai? There was an earthquake. So God, when he descends to meet with Moses, the earth is shaking and trembling. The earthquake is often presented in the Bible as the symbol of God's presence. Another example is Calvary, Golgotha. When Jesus dies, you remember what was there? There was an earthquake. His Father was there. When you go with Moses to Mount Sinai, you see darkness. Moses does not see the face of God because it's impossible for him to see the face of God and remain alive. But there's an earthquake, and there are lightnings. There are many symbols of God's presence. And when you go to Calvary, on Calvary there's darkness, very similar to the one there was on Mount Sinai, and there's an earthquake. There are lightnings. The same God who was with Moses on Mount Sinai is the same God who comes to Calvary. Many people, when they think about Jesus on Calvary, they just focus on him, but a lot of people may not notice the fact that his Father was there too. The presence of the earthquake, darkness and lightning at Calvary tells you and me that the Father was there. And Moses could not see the face of the Father because it was impossible for a sinful human being to do that and remain alive. Jesus could not see the face of his Father because of darkness, because he was separated with his Father to die a second death for you and me and pay the full ransom for your salvation and mine. But the Father was there. When he saw his, maybe only a few meters away, when he saw his Son die and pay the ultimate price for the iniquity and sin of all people, of all mankind throughout the ages. So, and later you find the presence of God in later texts. Take Acts chapter 4. You remember the group of apostles when they were summoned to the Sanhedrin and threatened that if you keep sharing Jesus with others, you will have a lot of trouble. They come back home and they start praying, "Oh Lord our God, please help us because everybody is against us." And you remember what happened then? The earth shook. There was an earthquake, a little one, which did not destroy the house, but that told the apostles, "Go out and do what you are told to do by Jesus. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." So that little earthquake symbolized the presence of God in their midst. So there comes another great earthquake. In fact, this earthquake is repeated in its mentioning in Revelation 16 at the end of the great plagues. You remember the 7 plagues which fall as judgments? There is a great earthquake. And there was a great earthquake. So this term great earthquake is mentioned several times in the book of Revelation, and it symbolizes the presence of God. Now God says, okay, my dear martyrs, from seal number 5, okay, I will go. I'll talk to mankind. I'll meet with mankind. And let's see what will be the outcome. God says, I will go and talk to my children on planet Earth. The sun turned black like sackcloth. Again, you see darkness. These are all symbols of God's presence, made of goat hair. And the whole moon turned blood red. And the stars in the sky fell to earth, as fig drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. All of these features symbolize the presence of the living God. As a foretaste of that great event, historically, you know that in different parts of the world in the past 300 years, there were several events which people could not very well explain. Like in America, there was a moon which looked like blood red about 200 years ago. There were several meteorite rains observed in different parts of the world in the past 200 or 300 years. Those things were just a foretaste, just little omens, little signs to tell mankind, look, there will come a moment in time when God himself will come and face human beings on this planet. And in this case, the heavens receded like what? Like a scroll rolled up. And every mountain and island was removed from its place. Can you imagine mountains and islands removed? How much power you would need to do that? When I was growing up in the Soviet Union wanted to solve a lot of problems by using a lot of energy. For example, they decided to irrigate the desert in what you know as Turkmenistan today. There is a country called Turkmenistan, and all it had was just the desert. So the Soviet people said, we're going to plant orchards, vineyards, beautiful gardens in the desert, and we'll divert the river Amudarya through this desert and we'll turn it into paradise. And they did it. They dug a huge canal from the river Amudarya to the Caspian Sea, and they irrigated the desert. However, another big lake called the Ural Sea now has disappeared from the map of the world. You probably heard about that. So the Soviets said, well, the Ural Lake is disappearing. Well, we can solve the problem by diverting some Siberian rivers into it. So let's go to the Ural Mountains, and they found a river which was flowing up north, so nobody needs this river. Let's make this river flow, instead of north to the Arctic Ocean, well, it will flow south to the Ural Sea. So what they did in 1972, at the beginning of the year, they brought nuclear weapons to the Ural Mountains, and they started blowing those weapons, making a new riverbed to divert the entire river, which was about 1,500 kilometers long, with the usage of nuclear weapons down to the Ural Sea. It was only when the whole world community pled with Leonid Brezhnev, please don't do this anymore, because radiation was detected all over the world, because they managed to blow 70 nuclear warheads there. They estimated that a few more hundred nuclear warheads and the entire giant river would flow, which is now flowing north, it will flow south. They had a lot of ambitious projects. It is possible to move mountains and islands, my dear friends, because I've seen it with my own eyes as a child. I come from the Ural Mountains where they had those nuclear explosions. It is possible to do those great things, but to do that you need nuclear energy. You need a lot of energy. In this case, the all-powerful, almighty, omnipotent God comes to this planet, and in his presence mountains and even islands move. So this text, Revelation 6 verses 12 to 14, shows us the awesomeness, the splendor of the creator of the universe. And when God comes to talk to human beings, do they want to talk to him in response? Today in the world we find a lot of skepticism and cynicism about the divine things. A lot of people are openly challenging God today by their lifestyle, by denying his very existence. Well, it's basically the fulfillment of the words of Christ in the Gospel of Luke. You remember when he said, when the Son of Man comes back to this world, will he find what? Will he find faith? So faithlessness, the overall secularization of human mind, and faithlessness, global faithlessness, is one of the signs of the second coming of Christ. The popularization of atheism, agnosticism, secularism, all of these things are just the signs of the times. Can you imagine the surprise of mankind when God says, well, why don't I just come and, you want to see me? I will come. In my own time, on my day, I will come and see you. I want to talk to you. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. Why is it that they are hiding and running away? Is it only because they see all these cataclysms, all these natural disasters happening in the world? Well, partially, yes, they're full of fear. But I think there's something in human hearts, with every human soul, and that is the feeling of guilt. Sin is still there. Even if you're an atheist, sin is still there. The deep unsatisfaction, the feeling of no realization of your life is still there. You remember the words of St. Augustine. Our hearts were made for God, and they will never rest. They will not rest until they rest in Him. Everything in the world has a purpose and a design, my dear friends. The car is designed to drive. You may put a car in the garage for 10 years, and many cars will just rust and be unfit to drive after they've been in the garage for too long, unused. A plane is designed to fly. A man is designed to give compliments to his wife. Everything in the world has a design. Human beings, we, as the crown of God's creation, were made in the image and likeness of God for a special form of fellowship with our Creator. Our hearts were made for God. And they will never rest until they rest in Him. Whatever humans do to bring this rest, whether it's wealth, vacation, education, culture, good health, good food, just the overall well-being, human praise, admiration and adoration. You name a long list of advantages of human life. All of these things put together will never bring what God can bring to a human being. And that is this feeling of union and alliance with God. They call to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of Him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it? Why is it that they're running? Why is it they're saying, hide us? It is because it is too late at that time. Because it's already the day of judgment. They have passed the line, the threshold, the barrier of no return. Unlike these people, there will be many who will be joyfully welcoming the coming of the Lamb. But the sixth seal emphasizes that God will have His day in this world. If you take the second commandment, you remember the second commandment? It talks a little bit about the mathematics of God's character. Now, when people talk about God's law, the Ten Commandments, talking about God's character, many people ask a question, where do you find God's character in the law? Well, it's very plain, in the second commandment. In the second commandment it says that God will extend His mercy to those who love Him and keep His commandments for how many generations? For thousands of generations, for 1,000 generations. But God's judgment will continue until how many generations? The third and the fourth. Let's take the fourth. So can you imagine, God's mercy is for 1,000 generations, and God's judgment is for how many? 4. If you use plain mathematics, 1,000 divided by 4, how much is that? 250. It's very plain and clear from the second commandment that God's mercy is at least 250 times greater than God's judgment. That's how great our God is. He's the most patient being in the entire universe. Look at how His grace keeps extending in the Bible. In the days of Noah, 100 and how many? 20 years. For the Canaanites, little over 400 years. The people of Israel, 490 years, Daniel 9, the 77s. After Christ, in the New Testament era, we've been on earth for over 2,000 years. And why? Why so long? It is because God's mercy is beyond human comprehension. Why is it that there have been now 2,000 years since Christ was here on this earth? Well, it is because God loves you and me. He had you in mind from the creation of the world. He knew that one day Raiko would be born, Brenton would be born, Vadim would be born, Helen would be born, Joel would be born. He knew He had you and your life in mind. And he knew that there will come a moment in time when you and him will meet, and you'll find true happiness in Christ. You'll find forgiveness. You'll find joy. You'll find real satisfaction, the true realization of your life, because he entered your life and your heart. But at the same time, God is not a doormat to wipe your feet off. Jesus will not always wash your feet. There will come a moment of justice. And God's justice will triumph forever. And that's the message of the sixth seal. It's a warning message to the world. There will come a moment when God will come to this world and talk to mankind. But what will be your reaction? What are you planning to do on that day when the sixth seal is opened and Jesus comes back to this world? Well, I grew up in the Ural Mountains, as I told you. And in my childhood, it was in the Ural Mountains where two things happened, which today I would like to tell you that helped me understand my spiritual and your spiritual experience. I grew up in an atheistic family, far from God, far from the Bible, and just simple parents, both working at a steel mills plant, my mother a chemical engineer, my father working in a big furnace in the continuous casting of steel factory. And once my father decided to go to the resort in the Ural Mountains and take me, a 5-year-old kid, with him. I was probably 4.5, but reaching 5 years of age. My father took a textbook with him, and because I asked him, Dad, can you teach me how to read? So in the evenings he would lay with me in bed and he taught me the alphabet and he taught me to read. So gradually I started reading different chapters of the textbook, and so it was quite a good experience. In the morning and in the afternoon and the evening, for 12 days, my father was teaching me to read. One afternoon, we went outside. There were mountains here, mountains there, and a beautiful lake. To run around the lake, it's 10 kilometers. So if you know, for instance, Ural Mountain here in Tasmania, and I and my family went there a few days ago, what a masterpiece of God's creation, the Dove Lake, the Ural Mountain. It's 6.5 kilometers to walk around it. So that lake is a little bit bigger, 10 kilometers to walk around it. And it was a nice winter day, January, probably pleasant temperature, about 15, 17 degrees below zero, mild snow falling. And there am I playing with children. We have sleigh, we have this and that. So, you know, we as kids, we knew no other world but that world. So I just was playing. And my father said, Vadim, I'll go across the lake, because the lake is frozen, you can walk on it. I'll go across the lake on the other side to another resort where my friend is, his workmates, and you just wait for me here. And in a couple hours I'll come back and we'll go home. So my father left, and there am I, just playing with children. Gradually, the sun sets down. It sets down in that part of the world very early, about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in winter, and other children left. To my disappointment, I actually forgot the little cabin where we lived, where it was. And then there was darkness, and I was left alone on the bank of that lake. It's cold, it's snowy, and there am I, just by myself. But I remembered my father said, Vadim, don't go anywhere until I come back and pick you up. So I thought, well, if my father said, just wait, I decided to wait. But it was getting very cold. I would play this and that, and then I said, well, I will play that I am a soldier of the Soviet Red Army. You know, and because the Soviet Red Army during the Second World War, like my grandfathers, they fought. So I took a stick, and it was a rifle for me. I was walking around playing a soldier. Finally, it was complete darkness again. My father never arrived, and I started crying. I realized I was alone on the bank, a 5-year-old kid, just by myself. I don't know what happened in my mind. I said in my mind, well, I'll just go looking for my father. I decided to cross the lake and look for him on the other side. To cross the lake, it was about 2 kilometers across the lake. And there was this footpath, which was quickly disappearing because of the snowfall. And I walked the footpath. And in my mind, I was a little bit scared because I was not sure if the ice in the lake was strong enough in some places. So I walked very carefully. And as I was in the middle of the lake, I saw a couple of men behind me. They were coming, and I was so happy. I was so relieved. I thought, well, now I'm a little bit more safe, because I was afraid of wolves. Because in that part of the world, we have wolves and bears. Bears are asleep. The brown bears are asleep in winter, but the wolves are awake in winter, and they're very dangerous. And I was afraid that the wolves would come and take me. But I kept walking, and those two men said, well, young boy, what are you doing here? So they were surprised that a 5-year-old kid was walking. I said, well, I'm walking across the lake because my father left in that direction for that resort, and I'm going to find him. So they said, well, just come with us, and we'll accompany you. And they just kept walking. Oh, on that day, I was so full of fear. I was so scared. Finally, a little bit away from me, I saw a figure with the contours which remind me of my father. I saw a running man. That was my dad. You won't believe me, but my father forgot about me that day. He came to his friends. Well, they decided to have a drink, and then another one, and for their wives, and they drank for their mothers, and they drank for their fathers, and for the Communist Party. They drank for everything. Until the time came when they forgot that they had children. At least my dad did. It was several hours later that he finally realized that he left me behind by myself on the bank of the frozen lake. And that's when he went running. When I saw him, I was so happy. And my dad said, Vadim, are you okay here? I said, yes, I'm okay. He never said anything else, but he took me by the hand, come with me. So I walked with him to the other side, and we came to this resort. He brought me into this party. There's music playing, everybody is getting drunk, and on that day, I realized my dad was very, very scared, and I could eat all the chocolates I wanted in the world, so it was quite a happy occasion. And my dad whispered in my ear, Vadim, you won't tell Mom, will you? Because my mother was at work in the city. She let us go for 12 days. And there was I. And my mother was pregnant with my sister at that time. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but I did tell my mom when we came back. I said, Mom, Dad forgot me on the bank of the lake. Oh, my dad was so happy when I did that. A few years later, probably 4 or 5 years later, when I was already at school, I remember when my parents and my younger sister, Olga, they went to that resort in winter. And I was staying behind at home with my grandmother, who came to babysit me. And I said, Grandma, I want to go and spend the weekend with my parents. And she said, well, but I'm an old woman, I can't take you there, and so why don't you stay? I said, well, Grandma, call my parents, tell them that you are going to put me on the bus, and I will go by bus, and they'll meet me at the stop on the other end. It's only 50 or 60 kilometers. At that time, I read countless books. I was very well educated. I was like a little adult at the age of 9. I knew everything. I knew the world geography, history, just everything. So finally, they agreed. Okay, on Friday night, my grandma will put me on the very last bus going in that direction when I come back home from school. And then she will call that resort and inform my parents that I left, and their duty is to meet me at the very last stop where the resort is, in the mountains, near the lake. Well, done deal. I get on the bus. The bus is packed with people, shoulder to shoulder, standing, sitting capacity, everything occupied. The last bus. I wave my hand to my grandma. Grandma, I love you, and I go. So the bus is traveling and traveling, making stops, unloading passengers, loading new passengers. And there am I, just waiting for me to arrive. Then I heard the driver announce the bus stop, which was Lake Barne, which is the name of that area where I was supposed to go. And I thought that is my stop, because that's the area where I was going. So I disembarked. I left the bus shut the doors and left. And then I realized it was not my stop. It was winter time. That night it was about 35 degrees below zero outside. a bright sky, full of beautiful stars, lonely forest, mountains, and I'm there by myself, a 9-year-old kid, left just... there's a great American movie which says Home Alone. Well, I was forest alone. I was again forest alone. And then I realized I'm lost. I don't know how long it'll take me to walk. It's cold. Well, I thought, well, what can I do? I looked quickly at the stars, calculated the different sides, where the north is, and found everything. And I said, well, the Soviet soldiers survived during the Second World War. My grandfather was in the Stalingrad battle in the middle of freezing winter, and I can survive, all right? So I decided to walk, but at the same time I was terribly scared. I was afraid of wolves. I was afraid of wild animals, and I kept walking. I walked for 7 kilometers in that cold by myself. And I was crying a lot during that time. I felt so lonely, abandoned. I felt absolutely sad and miserable, like any 9-year-old kid would feel. So I come to the big resorts, and I come to the reception. I come knock at the reception. It's late in the evening, probably 10:30. The lady wakes up. She opens the doors, and I'm asking, "Can you please tell me where the Butov family resides?" And she looked at me and said, "Young boy, what are you doing here this late?" She saw all the icicles on my eyes and my eyebrows, and I looked like a fairy tale figure, with a lot of ice, because I was crying so much, and all of my tears, they all froze all over me. And she said, "Well, your family lives in that cabin. I'm going to take you." So finally I felt, oh, now I'm all right, I'll go. And so as she was walking with me, I felt someone's strong hands lift me above the ground and put me to his chest. That was my father. Then I saw my mother, her face full of tears and full of icicles. Even my younger sister, who did not like the fact that she was born to a brother like me, even her face was full of tears. Normally, because you see, my sister was born by mistake. I was waiting for a brother to arrive. I wanted a brother. But I had a sister. And my sister, when she was born, she probably wanted a sister too, but she had a brother. So we gave each other a lot of trouble. Now I and my sister are more or less good friends, but as children we're like a classical example of a cat and dog living in one house. But even when we came home, my sister hugged me, and that was the first time my sister ever hugged me. And as my father was carrying me, they said, "Dad, put me down on the ground, I'll walk." I said, no. And he just was holding me tight to his chest, and for the first time in my whole life, I saw tears in my dad's eyes, because I never saw my father cry, not once, before that. I realized that my parents were very, very afraid. What happened, they arrived at the bus stop, the bus load of people disembarked, and I was not there. In those days, no pages, no cell phones, no anything. They rang my grandma in the city, and she said, "Well, he left with that bus." They said, "But he didn't arrive." So can you imagine, my grandma is losing consciousness on one end, my parents freaking out on the other end, and the child isn't here. The bus driver did not remember me because there were so many people, and also I did not report myself to the bus driver because I thought I'm grown up enough not to tell the bus driver. But what I will never forget is the tears of my father. I realized that day that my father, who was so strict with me, he still loved me. I saw how much my mother loved me. I saw how much my family was worried about my well-being, and the fact that I was in danger. I was left alone in the forest, and I had to walk more than 7 kilometers to get to safety. All of us humans, the reason why I'm sharing these stories with you, my friends, and I'm coming to close now, is that we as human beings, after thousands of years of sin, we still appreciate love, affection, care. We still appreciate family. Today, Pastor Brenton was talking about how much he appreciates his wife. We long for love and care and understanding, true mateship and friendship. after thousands of years of sin. These beautiful features of God's love and character are still a longing in the human heart. Well, my brothers and sisters, today, invisibly in the world, the creator of space and time, the one who is omnipotent, omniscient and omnipresent, who is never changing, who is truly love, whose mercy exceeds his judgment at least 250 times. He wants to take us, people lost in the cold wilderness of sin, and put us to his heart. Embrace us and tell us how much he loves us, that he never wants to separate from us. He always wants to be with us, look after us, provide for our needs, and see us through till the very end. And the beauty of the sixth seal is that that's an awful thing for those who don't know him. But when he comes, you'll be surprised at how happy you will be, because you'll see someone whom you've been walking all your life with. And he will be there on the clouds of heaven coming and telling you and me, "Oh, my children, I was waiting for this for thousands of years. Please come into the joy of my kingdom. I love you, and we'll spend eternity together." You know, sometimes I ask myself a question: why eternity? Why eternity? Well, because there's so many of us, and God is one. If you really want to spend enough time with him, you need eternity. Because if God gave us a limited term to live, let's say 1,000,000 years, that wouldn't be enough for all of us to even have a chat with him. But because there's going to be eternity, it means there's going to be plenty of time throughout the trillions of years for you and I to go for a walk with this God, have a talk, and enjoy the fellowship of the one who made you. And today, many people ask a question: why is he so invisible? That's what I tell every atheist. It is for our benefit. God is invisible because he wants to talk to us personally. If God were visible like the Queen of England, can you imagine the long line across the oceans to see him? But because he's invisible and he's omnipresent, he fills the whole universe with his presence. All of us can have a chat with him, a private time, a private talk, as if we were the only two participants of the dialogue. And he's available to you and me 24/7 at all times. Here am I today proclaiming to you from this book, my dear Tasmanian friends, and South Australian too, the great love, the great mercy of the creator of the universe. The Bible says, worship him who made the heavens, the earth, and the sea of water, and the springs of water. Would you like your hearts to be filled with the great love of this Creator God? Who would like to raise his hand to the sky and say, "Yeah, I want the love of God to fill my heart today. His warmth, his care, his compassion. I want those features in my heart." Let us pray. Father in heaven, I want to thank you that in every truth, in every passage of the Bible, in every scene and story, prophetic and real, we find the truth about your infinite love. Please bathe us in the ocean of your love and grace. Prepare us for the last days, but at the same time give this blessed assurance to every person that with this great God we have nothing to fear.